So matchmaking is supposed to be a fun way for new players to get into competitive TF2. Whee! I can fly! oh, crits! Crits! Yeah, die, Putus! Or if you already have some competitive experience, it's gonna be an awesome challenge for you and a great way for you to flex your E-peen. The thing is, most people agree that it's not really either of those things. So you queue up with friends, if you have any, you meditate over some peace and quiet, you get into a game, hopefully, and your team sucks. What is matchmaking really? Like, is it a big fat steaming pile of ass? Or is it TF2's last chance to rejoin its twin brother and sister Dota 2 and CSGO and being the esport that it deserves to be? Or is it a big fat steaming pile of ass? I don't know. I'm just asking the questions. I love TF2 so much, and it's been such a huge positive influence on my life, and I know it's done the same for so many people. That's part of why I have so much respect for Valve. Valve is a company that has created some of the greatest games in the last 20 years, period. The end. Constant innovation, quality content, and just fun games. Not to mention they're also working on the next generation of the greatest games ever made. But you know, at the same time, it's really frustrating when you dedicate your time and your energy into playing a game and you feel like the developers maybe don't care about it as much as you do. So matchmaking has problems, and I'm gonna talk about that. But what I also want to talk about is the fact that matchmaking essentially works the way it's supposed to. Maybe not perfectly yet, but it basically does what it's supposed to do. And I think the best thing to do is to work based on that to make it better and better. Not really tearing it down by default without really thinking about it, which is sort of what we've been doing since it was released. For example, I despise when players queue up just to waste everybody's time and everybody's rank, like by going spy to mid or NG to mid or something like that. But most players aren't doing that. You know, most players want to win. It's kind of human nature. It feels really bad when you lose, so therefore everybody wants to win. But that doesn't mean that they know how. A lot of players run pyro to mid or NG to mid because it's what they're most sort of comfortable with. It may not be the most efficient way to play TF2, but it's the best way they know how, and they are trying to win. Honestly, that's the point of matchmaking, to try to win instead of walking around a server with a sandwich in your hand. But meta. First of all, everybody knows that the meta is the most effective way to play TF2. I'm not saying that you have to abandon the meta altogether, but what do you want me to say here? You know, the meta? Matchmaking? The meta? Matchmaking? Like, what are we talking about here? So I don't think anything that I'm about to talk about will be implemented into TF2, but I do think that it's worth it to push the conversation forward because I really don't like where it's going. So what I'm going to talk about in this video is some of the problems that matchmaking is facing, why we should even give a shit, and some things that I think would help. A couple of weeks ago, I put out a survey asking people what matchmaking needed to improve upon. 69%, and no, that is not a made-up number, said that they were either dissatisfied or very dissatisfied with competitive matchmaking. The reasons that they gave ranged from, hey, there's too many graphics restrictions up in here, to, hey, my team fucking sucks. Let's see what people had to say. Placement matches is one thing Valve can add to matchmaking to make it better virtually overnight. Let's be honest, everyone hates having to grind up from the bottom just to reach your true rank, whatever that means. If TF2 actually implemented placement matches, within your first 10 games or so, you'd know which rank you basically belong in. It's a lot easier to try to grind your way up to Death Merchant from level 5, rather than starting from fresh meat like everybody does. It's sort of a big mistake to have everybody start out as fresh meat because that means that players that are actually very experienced in the game have to deal with some very inexperienced players in order to get themselves up to the top. Adding placement matches would probably keep people a lot more engaged in matchmaking and would help the balance of the matchmaking algorithm a ton. If tomorrow we woke up and Valve just implemented placement matches, we would see more balanced games instantly. About 60% of players said that for playing matchmaking we should get stuff, and I agree really. I would love to get stuff for playing matchmaking. It really makes me think about the MVM update when 2 Cities first came out. If you were lucky enough in 2 Cities, you'd end up with an Aussie weapon. This solid gold kill counting beauty of a weapon made you the idol of every pub server you joined. I would really like to see something similar to Australian weapons, where you could only get it from matchmaking, and when you wear them in a server, everybody looks and stares at them like they did when Aussies first came out, except this time it would actually mean that you're good at the game and not that you rolled the dice and got a little lucky. The main reason I think that rewards aren't coming anytime soon is, well, that's my next topic. Over half of players said that cheaters were a big problem for them in competitive matchmaking. The thing is, it's not just a matchmaking problem. Cheaters are a TF2 problem in general, and a problem that's easier said than fixed. I really don't envy Valve for having to take on this challenge, but I think this is the main reason that Valve hasn't already implemented some kind of reward system for competitive. Cheaters are already at the top of the leaderboards in competitive, and if you could get some kind of valuable item for playing matchmaking, cheaters would be all over that, farming matchmaking items to make a profit for themselves. A lot of competitive players prefer to use the lowest graphical settings and configs to keep their game running as smoothly as possible in terms of FPS. The biggest problem with that is when people come to TF2's Twitch page and it looks like everybody's playing Guncraft. I mean, I know that TF2 is about 10 years old, but it actually looks pretty good at higher settings. Graphical restrictions gives everyone a uniform experience and makes the game look half its age, but seriously alienates players that don't have great PCs. Really, I think that most people are hoping for some kind of graphical overhaul for TF2, which would be great, but who knows how or when that will ever happen. Before I continue with this, I want to stop and take a look at the entire spectrum of TF2 players that exist. It's going to be really important to keep this in mind when we start looking at some of the other problems that matchmaking has. On one hand, there's high-level competitive players. There's pockets, roamers, off classes, pick classes. There's an entire meta that is developed over time centered around playing the objective as effectively as possible and winning as efficiently as possible. On the other end of the spectrum, there is the most casual form of TF2. Pootis heavies, Gibbous players, Spy Crabs, Pyro Sharks, Rancho Relaxo engineers, and other aspects of the pub metagame that has developed over time. The purpose of the pub metagame is to ignore the objective and ignore the game in the most effective and efficient ways possible. It should be perfectly crystal clear to everyone why these two things are opposites. Not just that they're two different things, but that they're polar opposites, like the opposite ends of a magnet. Now, by themselves, I don't think that there's really much of a problem with these two communities, but I think where the problem comes from is the gap in between the two communities. There's sort of an area in between these two sections where I think TF2 is bleeding the most players, leading to its sort of stagnant growth that we've all seen over the years. There's a no man's land where if you're inside this range, you pretty much get shat on from all sides. This ranges from players who do especially well in pubs and really sort of take a lot of shit from their team because they have teammates who don't really want to play. You know, pubs are a game format that include random crits, random bullet spread, and other elements of the game that make it not really fun if you're actually trying. On the other hand, you have moderate level competitive players who enjoy playing TF2 competitively and I guess taking it more seriously than a pub stomper would, but they sometimes get trashed on by higher level competitive players, you know, for being bad and cringy and etc. If you exist in this range, then both sides tend to become kind of toxic to you. You don't really want to play pubs that much because no one gives a shit. It's a pub. No one's gonna, no one's gonna play medic. No one's gonna take the game seriously. But you don't really want to go into the higher levels of competitive TF2 because then no one's gonna take you seriously. This system that is developed over time basically creates a sort of invisible force that pushes players to either be extremely casual in pubs or pushes them to try to be the highest level competitive player that they can possibly be. And I guess for people who it works out like that, that's perfectly fine. But where the concern is for people who end up in this area and basically want to quit TF2. Like, a lot of players actually get trapped in this area and they don't see a way out, so they figure I might as well go play a different game rather than try some of the other alternatives. For me personally at least, the majority of people I know who quit TF2, which has been a lot recently, were people in this area where they, couldn't take pubs seriously at all, but when they went to go try to play higher level competitive, they really weren't taken seriously. Another effect of this is a sort of cutoff in the flow of people on the casual end of the spectrum into the competitive end of the spectrum, and that sort of leads to the sort of shrinking and small size of the competitive scene that we've seen a lot lately, and the shrinking of the competitive scene leads to a lot of some of the best players in TF2 honestly just leaving because they don't have enough eyes on them. They can go play something like Overwatch and get 10 times the money and recognition that they would have gotten playing TF2. If TF2 actually wants to grow and be like its brother and sister, Dota 2 and CSGO, then it has to bridge this gap somehow. TF2 needs something that is half this and half that. And, if only there was a place where pub stompers and moderate comp players could both go to compete and understand TF2 better. A place that isn't high level competitive, but isn't this. If only such a place existed, maybe TF2 could patch the major hole in its player base and actually experience growth for once. If only. It's matchmaking, you idiot. But rapid. Matchmaking's bad, okay? Matchmaking's bad. If you like matchmaking, that's bad, okay? Because matchmaking's bad. Okay, let's talk about what makes matchmaking really bad. The single biggest complaint that people had about competitive matchmaking was unbalanced game. The thing is that it's not really the balance that's the problem. The matchmaking system essentially does create balanced games, sometimes more so than FACEIT or even TF2 Center. The thing is, last semester I was taking a course called Distributed Systems, and I actually wanted to do my class project on matchmaking systems. I ended up doing it on some stupid Linux firewall protocol, but that's neither here nor there. I spent a lot of time actually studying on a more academic level, different matchmaking systems. And then after school was over, I started sort of playing more comp matchmaking, which inspired me to study more about matchmaking systems. I studied the ELO system. I studied the Glico system. I just studied the Glico 2 system, which is used in Guild Wars 2 and CSGO and other online games. I also looked into matchmaking systems for Dota 2, Overwatch, Heroes of the Storm, and some other stuff. So this is where I'm coming from when I talk about this stuff. In the most basic ELO system, a player is given a skill rating, and the matchmaker attempts to match you with a player of about an equal skill rating. Although the ELO system is really for 1v1 games, most multiplayer games use a kind of MMR system. Players who each have their own MMR score load up into a queue, and the matchmaker tries to create two teams so that the average MMR of Team A is about equal to the average MMR of Team B. There are more simple systems and there are more complex systems, but this is basically what happens. So if there are any chicken wings on your team, there's probably some chicken wings on the other team too. If you have to carry a load of dead weight, the other team probably has to carry a load of dead weight too. Don't get me wrong, of course teams get a little bit stacked sometimes, but for the most part the algorithm absolutely is working. What people are actually upset about isn't really the balance of the game, but just the balance of their team. People are basically upset that they're getting placed on the same team as people that aren't at their skill level. But when you think about it, the odds of getting matched with someone at your same skill level has to be really low. This is mainly because there are not enough people playing matchmaking. TF2's matchmaker is playing a game where it tries to take its pieces and it tries to balance them on a scale, but that's almost impossible to do when you either don't have enough pieces or you have too many of one kind of piece. It's not that the matchmaking algorithm doesn't work. The matchmaking algorithm, it works fine. It's not even that the games are unbalanced. I mean, sure, they're leaning more towards chicken icons than any other, but when you take into consideration that the balance of TF2 Center is literally random, it can't be that much of an issue. People don't like that they're being matched alongside so many inexperienced players, but even that isn't the problem. That's just a symptom of the problem. If the competitive matchmaking queue was a quarter of the size of the casual matchmaking queue, do you think that there would be these problems? The problem is there are not enough people in the queue for the system to function appropriately. You can't get matched with people that are at your same skill level because there aren't enough people to pick from. So what do you want Valve to do about it? At this point, there's nothing for Valve to do. If there's not enough people, then there's not enough people. Valve can't force people into the queue to make it work better. Valve can't just take people that queued up for MVM and say, oh, well, now you're playing matchmaking now. This was the #1 issue people had with matchmaking, and it's not even an issue that Valve caused. It's an issue that the community caused. There is one thing that Valve could do to actually fix this problem, and it's something that nobody wants Valve to do. Valve could actually make games a lot more balanced if they increased waiting times. Another huge problem is waiting times. In matchmaking systems, waiting times are directly related to things that you want from the system. For example, if you actually want more balanced games, then you have to be prepared to wait for much longer. Let's say I'm a death merchant and I want to queue up for matchmaking. I see that there's about 55 people in the queue, so I think, hey, why not just put me in a server with 12 of those 55 people, right? What you can't see is the rank makeup of those 55 people. What if every one of those 55 people were chicken wings, which is completely possible? That means there are 0 games that could be created, with you in it at least, that would even come close to resembling being balanced. Therefore, you have to wait for higher ranked people to come into the queue so that a somewhat balanced game can be created. There just aren't enough people in the queue. That's kind of all there is to it. If more people got off the matchmaking is bad bandwagon and actually just queued up, the games would be more balanced, the wait times would be much shorter, and it would just be a better experience for everyone involved. So this leaves TF2 in a pretty awkward situation. TF2 is clearly bleeding players, and the community is really rejecting something that could actually help. But why? 'Cause Meet Your Match sucked. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but no update has ever been perfect. Cause TF2's a dead game. I mean, people have said this for years, and there's really never been any solid evidence to back it up. Cause Valve doesn't care about TF2. You know, it's really weird to me because, you know, a few years ago, what everyone was saying was, Valve doesn't update TF2, they hate us, ah! Now it's more like, Valve is updating TF2, they hate us, ah! This whole concept of Valve hating TF2 has also been growing for years now, and once again, I don't think there's that much evidence to really back it up. Remember when Valve banned waves of Lamaubox users after Matchmaking came out? Like, remember when Jill hand deleted thousands of bot accounts? Remember when Valve went out of their way to let the community know that they listened about the Pyro update? I think that Valve is as receptive to the community as they have ever been. The more I think about it, the more I feel like it's a bandwagon effect that's really causing people to react this way to matchmaking. And we should know how sensitive the TF2 community is to bandwagons. So, how about this? If you're in that special range of people that I described earlier, I want you to go out and try matchmaking. Just try and play it. Not even like every day. Like, for me, I sort of play matchmaking as a replacement for casual, which is actually a pretty good description for it. It's basically casual, but people are at least supposed to try. I'm not even asking you to play matchmaking every day though. What if you played matchmaking once a week? Get a bunch of your friends, queue up, and just have fun. If you have a bad session, no problem. Take a break, take a breather, come back a week later. Come back with some of the best TF2 players you know and just have fun. If you already have some comp experience, show off your skills, show what you know, and collect that sweet MMR. It's just out there, you know, waiting to be plucked at this point. If you don't have comp experience, put your skills to the test. Figure out the best way for your teammates to use their strengths to win. According to the results of the survey, people who played matchmaking more liked it a lot more, and people who liked it a lot more obviously played it a lot more. I've also seen this effect firsthand quite a few times. So instead of avoiding matchmaking because insert YouTuber here said it was bad, you know, go give it a try for yourself. I also want to see people improving at making your players as useful as possible. Do not tilt if someone on your team is not at your level. Getting mad will not help in any way. A lot of times I see people get mad because someone on their team doesn't really get what they're supposed to do. You know, sometimes there's a player with like 300 hours and others will get mad at him because he doesn't understand the sixes meta or whatever. But let's be honest here. Did you really expect someone with 300 hours to just be like, oh, I will go and make a sacrifice play so that I can force their Uber? Oh no, it did not work. I will come up as an engineer on the last point to make the best use of my defensive capabilities. Like, no, of course not. Of course he's not gonna say that, right? But that doesn't mean that the person is useless. As I said before, the matchmaking algorithm is it's decent. And if there's dead weight on your team, what you have to understand is that there's dead weight on the other team too. The team that will always win is the team that finds a way to make their dead weight as useful as possible. Create very simple strategies for people to follow. Remember that they're coming from pubs where the only strategy anyone uses is to hold W until you die. One simple strategy I like to use is this. Let's say after a few fights, there's someone on your team that's going like 2-13 or something like that. I will usually ask them to play as a second medic. It's simple, it's easy, and instead of dying a lot, he's keeping the rest of us alive. This strategy has won me many games in matchmaking. Or let's say there's a pyro that just runs into the fight without thinking. You know, have a vaccinator med pop some charges on him before he goes in, and use him as a distraction and kill the players that are trying to focus him down. This player may not be able to do the standard roamer bomb distraction, but that doesn't mean that he can't be just as useful. Well, that's pretty much all I have. I spent way too much time writing this, editing this, making this, and I'm gonna go kill myself. I mean, play competitive matchmaking.